Okay, right.
I can cough and clear my throat and stuff.
Oh yeah, you can do what you want. Yeah, it's
and I can drink out of me mug.
You can do what you want, John. It's all
It's
nice and raw, so that's what we like about these Q&As.
Sweet work. I've got people. Let me. If I shut this window first, because it's going to get redders in here now, but it'll stop the noise.
Right. So that link should be with you.
Okay, it is.
Right.
Yeah, it's.
And I can drink out of me. Oh, that is one. Yeah, there you go.
Right. Okay. So for those who are just joining us now, thanks everyone for joining us. As you know, if you're a regular here, it takes a couple of minutes for me to get this out on social media. But while we do that, John, what have you been up to since we last chatted with that new Air Museum? I think it was when was it, like 2-3 weeks ago now?
Yeah, it was nearly 3 weeks ago, because I've been to London sightseeing. I had a holiday in London. Stayed in a place and somebody got stabbed right outside, so that was interesting. The full London experience straight away. But then on the last day, I got pinged by the app. So the last 10 days, I've been spent looking at the inside of my 4 walls in 31 degrees in a house that takes the sun from 3 directions all through the day. So I've just been cooking for 10 days.
Yeah, like the rest of us, I think, like it's up. I interviewed recently at Newark last weekend, and it was 31 degrees when we were filming. Oh my bloody God, it was bloody boiling, John. But for those who don't know John, he's a former Buccaneer, Tornado GR1 and Sea Harrier pilot. But while the questions come in, John, can you just give us a bit of background, if the people don't know you, just about your RAF and Royal Navy career?
Yes, I joined the RAF at the end of '85, started really in 1986, went through the training pipeline, was sent to the Buccaneer, flew the Hunter for a little while, then the Buccaneer. That's just how you did it. There's no 2-sticker Buccaneer, of course, so you need to do a bit of Hunter time first. Then to the Tornado, and then to the Hawk as a weapons instructor before going on exchange to the Navy and operating off Invincible, HMS Invincible and HMS Ark Royal. And then left, joined an airline, worked on the aircraft carrier project as the integration manager for F-35 into that design. Set up a training company, still work in the airline industry, but do training. And now we're helping the Turkish government do a little bit of work on the Sea of Marmara crisis to try and understand how drones can be used to stop that sea mucilage or mucilage problem.
Brilliant, yeah, but I'm going to get a few questions in. So, by the way, guys who are just joining us, get your questions in for John. But, so when we were talking at our interview, you didn't really, not say like you favoured the Sea Harrier, but you didn't really like mention the Tornado much in terms of like you loved it, because you were talking about, which ones you like had fond memories of. But you must have fond memories of the Tornado GR1.
I absolutely do, and I think I said at the time, it's a spaceship, and at the time that I flew it in the mid-90s, it still was, and it was a highly effective bomber, and we did operational low flying in it, flew at 100 feet in Goose Bay and on operations, of course, and the terrain following radar, when you can fly with your hands on your knees at night in cloud in the mountains. It's not for the faint-hearted, but there you are sitting there in an aeroplane built by, German and Italians as well as Brits, and you're all doing the same job, and it was highly rewarding. And of course, it still had a navigator in the back, and without the two of you working hard together, you were going to get nowhere in the Tornado. You couldn't do it really on your own. So it was a very rewarding aeroplane. I loved it. It was great. But the question was, which have you got fondest memories of? And Buccaneer and Sea Harrier really piqued my interest.
Absolutely. Well, you can see there's some questions coming in there on the right there for you, John. So I'm going to let you loose, and if you need me, just give me a shout. But guys, enjoy and get your questions coming in.
What did you say before launching air-to-air missiles before Fox quotes were invented? Well, I don't know, because I was always using Fox quotes. So in the Buccaneer, it was Fox 2. We did carry the Sidewinder. On the Tornado, it was an integrated weapon, so we could slew it and we could look into the turn and use it that way, and that was Fox 2. And the same on the Hawk. But when we went to the Sea Harrier, when I went to the Sea Harrier, then we had the AMRAAM, and it was the full gambit of Fox 3 and all of the calls that go inside the AMRAAM architecture, and of course Fox 2 as well, but this time with the AIM-9 Mike Sidewinder. What do I think of the Pakistan Air Force? I don't really know. I know a guy that went there and flew training aeroplanes. He was a Tornado pilot, and he had a wonderful experience. He was in the northwest of the country, I think, and he came back with incredibly fond memories of working with the Pakistan Air Force. Have you ever exercised with the Israeli Air Force, and how was the experience? Well, not as a serving officer. I did go to Israel in the 80s during the Bekaa Valley War. And I got to fire a tank round from a Merkava tank into an old British police station. They found that hilarious, that I'd have to shoot a British police station up on the Golan Heights. So that was really interesting. That's my only experience of Israel. I lived with a lady called Leah Netanyahu, same family as the ruling ex-prime minister there. And I knew that family quite well as a result. What was the biggest difference in the air-to-surface equipment between the Buccaneer and the Tornado? Well, the Tornado was a wonderful bombing platform. It did have some issues with store capture underneath that big flat belly. So carrying 8 or 5 bombs, you could end up with some store interaction problems where one bomb would come off, open its parachute, capture the air of the bomb behind it, would then sneak past it, but on the way they'd clank into each other, and that was always causing a bit of gnashing of teeth. But if you wanted to go bombing, you went in the Tornado. If you wanted to go and sink a ship, though, you went in a Buccaneer. Now the Tornado had the Buccaneer had a rotating bomb bay, and it also had fuel in it. But when we were using the Sea Eagle missile, we put an extra fuel tank in there to give us, I think, 20 odd tons of fuel, pounds of fuel, sorry, 20 odd 1,000 pounds of fuel, which would give us those extra legs and allow us to stay faster for longer. So the Buccaneer could have 4 bombs in the rotating bomb bay and a couple under the wings, but the Tornado was the real bomber. Apart from the size, what are the main differences between the Buccaneer, Tornado and Sea Harrier? Tornado and Buccaneer, similar size, but the Harrier and Buccaneer are subsonic, for example. Well, if you're carrying anything on the outside of the aeroplane, and most do, or did at the time, supersonic's really not an option. You will very quickly do a thing called T-case, which is you'll put thermic cycles into the bombs, and the bombs will get hotter over time. So if you're on peacekeeping operations, the faster you go, the more latent temperature will build on the inside of the bomb, and that's the place you don't want the heat unless you want it to go bang. And of course on peacekeeping operations you're taking the bombs there, and usually you'd be bringing them back, and so over time those heat cycles would ramp up. So in terms of speed, high subsonic speed is the place to be as an air-to-ground platform if you're bombing in a tactical sense. So I was always happy that we weren't supersonic. I wasn't too happy that the Sea Harrier wasn't, because you are never going to be further away from the enemy than you are right now. So every second that goes on, the enemy's going to be getting closer if you're in a Sea Harrier. Now that's all right, because in the Sea Harrier we had the confidence to know that we were going to be able to see them before they could see us, and we had a range on our missiles that meant we could touch them before they could even shoot at us. And so that wasn't too big a problem. But if you did have to leave that fight, you were really going to get what we call Pac-Man. Somebody was going to get round the back of you and eat you, really. So the high subsonic speed is great for a bomber, not so much for a fighter. However, if you did end up getting to a visual merge with a Sea Harrier, then it was going to be drastic and entertaining, because the Sea Harrier could do amazing things in the visual arena. Did you train anti-ship ops in the Buccaneer, aside from Laughing Seagull? Don't quite understand that, but we did anti-ship ops with LGBs. So LGB is a laser-guided bomb, and 2 aircraft would have lasers, and 2 aircraft would pull up and what we'd call toss the bomb. So we'd do short vary toss, really, using a timer, and we'd know what range to pull up for with what wind, and the navigator would sort it all out, and we would then accept by pulling in on the throttles, I think, as I recall, and then we'd follow a pull-up cue in the strike sight, which was not a head-up display at all. It was just a weapons sight in the Buck. We didn't have a head-up display. So yes, we could sink ships. If you wanted to really damage a ship, you'd use a Seagull, but if you wanted to sink it, you'd use LGBs. I actually did get to sink a ship, HMS Arethusa, on a Sink-X off the southwest coast of Cornwall. A very sad day, actually, because we're saying goodbye to a really wonderful vessel, and and all of the men that had sailed in her will obviously have fond memories of her, but it was needed, and it was the coup de grace that we gave at the end of her service after everything else had fired into her. I've seen different types of wings in a Buccaneer. I might be wrong. I don't think so. I think both the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 wing had a slit along the forward edge where we blew air from the compressors at the front of the Spey engines. And that allowed us to energize the boundary layer going over the wing, which meant that as long as you kept the power up, the aircraft would sit at a good attitude. And as you came round finals, you'd be able to fly very accurately at very low speeds. But the aeroplane was quite a handful in and around the carrier, so I understand, but it was a big enough handful in the circuit at Lossiemouth, so what it was like on Eagle and the old Ark Royal, I really don't know. But it was, and we called that a blown landing, so it's called a 30-20-20, which is different settings for the flaps on the tailplane as well as the flaps on the wings, which was a bit odd. You had flaps on the tailplane as well. What is your favourite air-to-surface weapon? I would say the 1,000-pounder. You can move a lot of dirt with a 1,000-pounder and anything attached to it, really. So a 1,000-pounder with a decent fuse. It's all about fusing, really, when you talk about heavy weapons. So, and we had a very good fuse, the MFBF fuse. Can't talk too much about that even now, I don't think. Because there are some sensitivities to how it was deployed. Did you carry weapons in the cockpit in case you ejected over enemy territory? Yeah, hot point this. We started carrying a 9mm Browning pistol, which had a lot of stopping power, and we were reasonably good with it. And then we got the old James Bond Walther PP, which was, it looked a bit like a toy water pistol, really, and was probably a little less effective than a toy water pistol. Let's have a look. What was the standard operating procedure during an enemy raid on your airfield? Sit with anything big over the top of you, really. We used to operate in hardened aircraft shelters and also hardened facilities. So we had filtered air, filtered water, everything was captured, nothing went outside of the ecosystem. So we could operate there for quite a long time, and there were rations and water and toilet facilities, and also a way of getting the missions through to us without having to go outside. Was the Tornado IDS used to simulate Fencer in DACT? I never did DACT simulating anything as a Tornado. Everybody wanted to find out how to shoot us as a Tornado, to be honest. So we just played as a Tornado, and we got more training value that way as well. We weren't really there to simulate anybody else, but on the Sea Harrier we would. We'd often operate as MiG-29 or Su-27, and we'd follow their tactics, and we'd use their missile orthodoxy so that we could simulate the Russian tactics for adversaries that were within NATO. So we would often be used as a target training opportunity because we could mimic that aircraft's performance pretty well. Why are Western fighter jets more superior than Russian fighter jets? I'm not sure they are. Certainly not now. I mean, the thing that will always define who's going to win is the spirit of attack in the heart and mind of the pilot, and then a load of training, and then the aircraft. That's what's going to make the difference. So it's that ability to get stuck in and get your teeth into his ear. That's what's going to make you win or lose. As I'm English, I'm sorry for sounding so American, but thank you for your service. Oh, thanks very much. That's from Simon Mitchner. And the fact you flew one of my favourite aeroplanes, the Buccaneer, helps. So, yep, thank you. Remember, I didn't really want to go to the Buccaneer, but it was a happy accident, as I think you've all heard now. SHAR DACT capabilities against different airframes, like as many jets as you can think of, if you could. And that's from Will Sabry. DACT in the Sea Harrier, there's two different types of fight. There's a nose position fight, or aircraft position fight, and a nose position fight. So it's a pointing angles fight, or where the aircraft is. And the Sea Harrier enjoyed the ability to transfer between the two at any point in the combat. And if you remember, I was talking on the main interview about the bat turn that an F-16 or an F-18 or Mirage 2000 Delta can take. That's nose position at that point. And after that, though, it's an aircraft position point, because they've lost a lot of nose authority because they've no longer got the speed. Whereas the Sea Harrier, we could get the nose really high, get over the top because we had all that power, which meant that we could come over the top and then roll through 360 degrees. So people couldn't get up with us because they often didn't have the power then, or the speed, to get the nose to do what it wanted to do. But we could, because we could sit on that big motor. And once you've got what we call in post, so you're in the center of the fight, and you've got 360 degrees lead and lag then, and we can just use roll to take big bites out of everybody. And then when we come out, we can get the nose up and still be descending with the nose pitching up. And in that chance, we can then get a shot as we go through. So, but that was a lot of HOTAS, which is hands on throttle and stick. Again, you know, some of this action going on. Lots of finger work and QWERTY going on with your fingers. From Louis K, is it a handful to operate the Harrier? Oh, I thought it was. Nothing was really easy in it, but the aeroplane got you out of a lot of trouble. It's also got you into a lot of trouble if you didn't handle it very well. But you did need the lightest of touches. You needed to be quite gentle on the controls, but at the same time aggressive with your mind. So it was a really interesting mix. So to fight the aeroplane well, you had to really be aggressive and go, you know, where's the guy going to die? He's going to die over there. So I'm going to fly my weapon sight to there, and he'll get there in time to die. And that's the thought process. It's not, I'm going to fly this really gently and on the nibble, and I'm going to, you know, do some sort of take your breath away stuff. That's not what it was. It was, how can I kill him as quick as I can without missing an opportunity? And one of the things I used to teach on the OCU was your best chance of killing him is the one you've just missed. So let one of the skinny white wingmen do the work, you know, let the plane take the strain, and don't be frightened to pull the trigger. Get on with it, get some rounds down, get a missile in the air, because usually with the probability of a kill that we had in the system, you were going to get one. And why, you know, prolong his agony? Why make him die bunched, as we used to say? Oh, I need to bring this down a little bit. I see how that works now. Satyajit Lal, what was the reputation of the Gnat in the Royal Air Force? Well, we flew with a lot of instructors that had done their training on the Gnat, and they were always telling us that it was better than the Hawk. Well, if it was, why did they replace it with a Hawk? Just a thought. This is from MKMD Exploration and Paranormal. Did the onboard water have much effect with a full loadout and manoeuvring at high speed? The water was just a spray on the turbine, and you threw water on the turbine with a switch, and there was an RPM at which it would trigger and start to flow. Once it started to flow, it was flowing, so then you had to switch it off with the switch. But all it would do would spray the turbine with water. That would cool it by 15 degrees. You'd then throw more fuel in and raise that temperature back up 15 degrees. That gives you more RPM, a few more percent RPM. And that 15 degrees meant that you took the engine almost to its melting point, and then you blew air through the center of each of the blades. And again, from the compressor, the engine did it all. We didn't have to do any of that. But all the water did was give you an extra 15 degrees of temperature for the back end. That allowed you to get more RPM, more thrust for the hover. Alexander Vatter, you may be biased, but was the decision against Katabar and the Stovall on the Queen Elizabeth class the right one in your opinion? I think we're going to find out. And if I had the time again, I would still be voting for Stovall. Yes, the aeroplane has not got such a long weapons bay, so the missiles are a little bit shorter, so therefore they haven't got quite the range, can't carry quite as much. The thrust push that we were expecting didn't quite materialize as I understand it. I might be wrong with that, but that's my understanding. But the benefit of Stovall means that we can operate from austere locations ashore. Now remember, the aeroplane, yes, is designed to operate from the carrier, and that's our ConOps, our concept of operations. But what about shore basing and sea basing? What if we use the carrier to deploy aeroplanes ashore, operate for a day, and then collapse that forward operating base at night, perhaps, and bring the aircraft back for maintenance and servicing? Now, the Navy isn't going to like to hear that idea, but it was certainly something that was being discussed. And you can't do that very well with cat and trap aircraft because the runway length is enormous. And so the Stovall option was probably the only way you'd get that to work. How would you compare the Tornado to the Mirage 2000? Well, I never had to do much against the Mirage 2000. I did fly with Mirage 2000 on TLP. On the very first flight we did, myself and the other aircraft from my squadron, we were at the front of the big gorilla train where we were all on the first mission. You just fly a route, and all the fighters are in different cap stations, and you fly through them and you look at your radar warning receiver and you see what it gives you as a code, and you know the rackets that you hear in your headphones, so that you get to learn what a Mirage 2000 Delta sounds like. But as we were passing Cambrai in France, we went through the Mirage 2000 cap station, and I saw a Mirage come straight down one side by my right ear, and I started to widen, which we weren't really allowed to do. We were told just to fly the route and listen and watch. But as I looked to my wingman, who was about 2.5 miles away, level with us, you know, a beam, I saw this perfect donut in the sky of smoke, and that was the engine from the Mirage 2000, who had chilled to reduce his heat signature, and then he'd slammed to full power inside min range for our Sidewinder, and he'd started his back turn but left the engine 1/2 mile behind as it exploded, and then he ejected. And so on our very first TLP mission, we had a live ejection, and we couldn't turn round to go into a normal SAR cap to look after them or look after him, because we had 30 odd aircraft coming behind us. And so we had to just carry on with the route, and there was nothing less intuitive than to sit there and fly a route when you know that one of your mates has just had to step out. Could we have saved a huge amount of money and maintained a higher degree of ability by keeping a lot more of the old stuff in service instead of slashing everything? At some point, things get too old, and as the Big Bang is still happening and things are still decaying and atrophying, look at the Buccaneer. You know, the metals in the airframe were degrading. It wasn't just that they were old, and it wasn't just that they had cracks. It was the metal was changing its chemical composition. This happens with age. And so at some point you have to pull the trigger on buying new stuff. And if you buy new stuff, that has a lead time of design process, concept, integration, management of new sensors, technological risk, looking ahead to see what is going to be available and taking a punt on the future capability. So it costs a fortune to keep old aeroplanes flying, and then when they can't anymore, there's too big a gap to get the new stuff flying. So I'd say no, I agreed with what was happening there in many ways, to be honest. Can you take us through any hairy moments you encountered? And this is from MKMD. Any hairy moments while on the carrier or on approach? Well, I had a number of occasions where I nearly had to step over the side. There's one in particular where I taxied out onto the runway. It was Art Royal, I believe, and we were again off Cadiz, as I recall, and we'd just been attacked by the Principe d'Asturias's Matadors, and I hadn't been actioned, and I was on the alert, and then all of a sudden we're actioned. It was all very late, and you know, as with all things, I was not best pleased at getting airborne late on a raid when I've just seen a Matador fly past the ship, and it's my job to stop that happening. And so, you know, and I'd been on board in an aeroplane ready to go, so I was a bit miffed. So I taxied out onto the runway and did everything that I should, slammed to full power. And in the Sea Harrier, you skid for 12 feet with the brakes on, then you release the brakes. But you have nose wheel steering, but you either have nose wheel steering or you have anti-skid. You can't have it both ways. You either have one or the other. And on the carrier, you need to be able to hit the center of the ski jump. And you look in to make sure that the RPM is still high and is starting to get, it's almost intake momentum drag. You do get a little bit of an increase in RPM as you get the more air going into it. And I looked in to check that I was getting some movement of power. And actually I saw, as you would see it, it going that way. So the power was decreasing, not increasing. And the rate at which it was decreasing was not in accordance to where my power was, because it was in the loud corner, it was in the noisy corner, and I wasn't bringing it back. And I had my hand on it, pushing it forward, ready to move my hand to the nozzle lever, and I could see that the RPM was trimming back much faster than was healthy. So I aborted the takeoff. Now, I knew not to bring the power back to idle. I just pulled the nozzles into the braking stop, so I was getting 10% forward nozzle, and then pulled back the power and massively braked. And as I hit the brakes with no anti-skid, both tyres exploded, and I started going up the ramp, and I put my head back to eject, and I was aware that I'd sort of stopped, and I sort of opened an eye and looked left and right, and there I am halfway up the ramp. So I quickly put my pins in the aircraft, slid the canopy back, and then jumped out and slid off the back wing and ran to get in another aeroplane, because there was still this fighter that needed shooting. So I got into the aeroplane, and they brought the book, and the ground crew were looking at me with white faces. And then on the telebrief, once they plugged it in, they said, "John, will you come and see us, please?" And that was up at Flyco, the big greenhouse on the roof. And I said, launch me. And they said, look at the runway. And I looked at the runway and it was covered in liquid and bits of tyre, and nobody was going flying off Ark Royal for some time. And then I looked up at the aeroplane and it had a big railway sleeper thing behind it to stop it from sliding back. So how was I going to get airborne? It was all very mission focused, you know, and all of it stupid, really. And they gave me a day off because they thought I needed a day off. But I was on board a warship, so what do? I sit around on a warship. It's not quite a day off, is it? But that's what happened. So yes, that was a hairy moment. And there are other hairy moments, of course, where the weather usually, and then the ship's ability to match the conditions with what they're aiming to achieve, especially when a ship is just out of refit and everybody's new, and the ship has to be at the top of its game to be able to cope with pilots that are at the top of theirs, because the pilots are always ambitious to go and do stuff, so is the ship, but they're not always in step, and that can cause all sorts of trouble. So, and it often did. So that would be a hairy moment, I would say. This is from the Freckle Puny. How good was the air-to-ground capability of the late model Sea Harrier FA2, and how inferior was it to the GR 5, 7 and 9 in this regard? Well, I never flew the 5, 7 or 9, but I was a weapons instructor on the FA2. Obviously, the GR 5, 7 and 9 was a super bomber. There were some issues with ballistic tables in the computer, and they used to have some sort of fudge factor to be able to drop a bomb accurately that wasn't a live weapon. I mean, live weapons, the software was fine by all accounts, but the thing that made the difference on the Sea Harrier were the pilots. And let me explain what I mean by that. When I went to 800 Squadron as the weapons instructor, I looked at the stats and I couldn't find any bombing since Bosnia, sort of 4 years before. And so I went to my boss and said, you know what, we're supposed to be a multi-role, swing role platform, and we haven't done any live bombing or real bombing or complex bombing for years. And he said, oh, it's bombing though, it's easy. All right. And I'd spent, 4 tours, making an art form out of dropping bombs. So I thought, I want to make a bit of a point here. So I said, no, I don't think we're as capable as we think we are. And he said, well, what do you think we ought to do? And I said, I think we ought to go somewhere difficult to bomb. And the hardest weapon range in NATO really is Solenzara in Corsica. It's a nightmare to bomb it. The height sensor management and the problems with how high you are above the target are enormous, and the Sea Harrier is not good at bowling that out. So I thought that'll serve to prove a point. So he said, okay, fine. And then it went to Commander SHAR, who was in charge of the Sea Harrier force, and he sent as many spare pilots as he could muster. And so we took everybody that was spare. I think 801 was at sea, but we took everybody else, and we went to Solenzara to bomb. Now, in the 4 or 5 days coming up to it, nobody came up to me to say, well, what's all this bombing about? Show me what we need to do. Let's have a look at the books. Now, we have these laptops with secret stuff on, and nobody asked me about any of the bombing. In fact, the day before, nobody asked me how we were going to get to Corsica. And so I did all the maps and handed them out at the brief, and off we went. Well, we got to Solenzara, and I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll sort the men out from the boys, and I'll give them what we call Hornet Pop into air-to-surface difference ranging, which is using the radar as the height sensor rather than the radio altimeter. Because with the radio altimeter, every time you go over bumpy ground, the calculation of the forward throw of the bomb would go in and out like a trombone, and it was called tromboning. So that wasn't the height sensor to use over undulating ground, and Solenzara was like the moon. It was everything. So air-to-surface difference ranging was the way to go, and that's a smoothed algorithm in the radar. It looks at the ground, it puts everything into little packets, and then it averages them out, and it can tell you exactly how high you are above what the radar is looking at. So there's a lot of fun work back here on a little hand controller, and there's a lot of up and down with the bomb fall line, and you've got to fly it right. But of course, on the way in, I wanted them to run it in at 100 feet, pull up to about 45 degrees nose up, roll upside down and come over the top, and then roll out and drop bombs using air-to-surface difference ranging in steep dive. That is the hardest thing you can do. So I thought on the first day with the first 4 ship, I'm going to make it hard for everybody and show them why we're there. So I sit down and the teletype's on. If you remember the pools when the scores used to come up, there was and this little thing jumping up and down. Well, that's how the scores came through on this really old teletype thing. And then it came up with Satan 1, Bomb 1, Delta Hotel. Brilliant. So the first bomb has hit the target. Satan 2, Delta Hotel. Oh, Satan 3, 15 feet at 6. Satan 4, Delta Hotel. And this just went on and on until they'd all dropped 4 bombs, all of which were inside 20 feet. And I'd just taken the whole squadron and guests all the way across Europe to tell them how bad they were at bombing. And they land and they look at me, and one of them's chewing gum and he goes, "What we here for again, mate?" So yeah, it can be a bit embarrassing really when you think you know what you're talking about. And of course these guys were just amazing pilots, and nothing was difficult for them. Of course they'd been working. Of course they knew what was happening. They just didn't want anybody to see that they were doing that work. And that was typical of those guys. And you never knew quite where you were because everything was done really, really to a high standard. And in fact, it was at Solenzara, nearly had another ejection. It was flying our operations officer. His surname was Gator, so of course his nickname was Ali. So Alligator had been trying to get a backseat ride in the T8 for ages, and so I took him flying. And at the same time, another great instructor pilot called Russ Eatwell took the head of the French Air Force flying in another T8, and the two of us got airborne. And the forecast was for probably 15 knots of wind. Now, Solenzara sits with a north-south runway, but 4 miles to the west, halfway down the runway, is a valley pointing straight at the runway with these really big mountains that attract some of the worst thunderstorms in Europe. But there were no thunderstorms, so we were cool. So we went off and did some flying, and we were supposed to do an airfield attack at Figari, which is an airfield on the south coast of Corsica. And as we come round, I'm looking at the water, at the waves, thinking, that looks rough. And then Russ says, "Have you seen the wind, JP?" And I look in on my readout line to look at the wind, and it's over 100 knots. Now, that is hurricane force wind, and none of this was forecast. Of course, it wasn't a hurricane. It was just a localized effect. I think between Corsica and Sardinia, something happens. So we thought, oh, we don't want to stop the flight because we've got some really important people in with us, Alligator, who we cherished, and the head of the French Air Force. So we go back and we plan to do some, interesting VTOL and hovery stuff. And I was the number 2. And as Russ Eatwell comes round finals, I come round as well. And we're going to do rolling vertical landings, touch the ground, go airborne again, and then turn, bow, back to normal, turn, and then accelerate out and land. That was the plan. Very simple, or so you'd think. But as we come into land, and in the Sea Harrier, you've got, well, any Harrier, you've got to keep this little weather vane on the nose pointing into wind. If it doesn't, the aircraft wants to fly upside down. And it will fly upside down if you don't keep it in the middle. But to keep it in the middle, you've got to be flying into wind at some point. And this wind is now coming from the gap in the 2 mountains. And so as we decelerate, the aircraft both turn. And so instead of pointing down the runway, we're now at 90 degrees to the runway. Well, that's all right, because now we can do the bowie thing. We've lost our ability to do the rolling vertical landing thing. And we start the bow, and I'm looking at my head-up display. The head-up display will draw sides of an octagon, and that's called 8 flats. At the end of 8 flats is really bad juju, because you end up cooking the engine if you do 3 more flats that stick out of the top. And I'm right at the top of all of that, and my power is going up. So you'll hear Harrier pilots say trip the limiters. So I do that. I push the throttle into the limiters, flick the limiter switch, and of course the water's now flowing. Nothing really happens. I'm running out of RPM, and I look ahead, and there's all these aircraft on the apron, but there's a little bit of taxiway pointing at it, and I think that'll do. And I do a rolling vertical landing with the power right in the top corner with no more space for it to go. And I land and then stop, and I ask Ali to put his pins in. It's the end of the flight, as far as I'm concerned. And I look across to see where Russ is, and he's on the other taxiway about 3/4 of a mile away, pointing the same way, and exactly the same thing had happened to him. So that's my recollection of it. It all happened very fast. So that was a dodgy moment. And in the hover at that point, with no more performance, only one of us might have survived the ejection, because the nose would have come down with the impulse of the seat, and the other one would have had too low a trajectory, and it would have been a disaster. So that was a dodgy moment as well on the Sea Harrier. That was a long story. Sorry about that. Did I ever carry the JP233 on the Tornado? No, practiced the symbology a lot, but never got to fly with it. I joined the Tornado after the Gulf War, so by then we were starting to think of using the aeroplane in different ways. Will Sabring, what was your opinion on, firstly, the withdrawal of the SHAR from service, and secondly, the complete withdrawal of the Harrier force in favour of the Tornado? I have to defer to the opinion of another great pilot, actually, a guy called Chris Ward, who asked a really difficult question of the Prime Minister, then David Cameron, on television. And I think he said something along the lines of, I've done 3 tours in Afghan and risked my life for my country, and now I'm going to be told that I'm being made redundant. How should I feel about that? And I think that summed up everybody's thoughts at the end of the Harrier. From all accounts, they had to make a choice between Tornado and the Harrier. They chose the right one because the Tornado was a better bombing platform than from the Harrier. The reason for getting the Sea Harrier was that the radar was costing the country a fortune. Keeping the aeroplane flying with serviceable radars was hard, and the aircraft had run out of power and growth potential. So there was no way of getting extra power into the aircraft. We could fit a slightly bigger engine to operate in the hot and thin atmospheres, like in the Straits of Hormuz. But we then couldn't upgrade the Harrier GR7 as well. There just wasn't the money in those days. And so the decision to get rid of the Sea Harrier was difficult to swallow, because then you lost your organic air defence. And if you've got no air defence, how do you protect the ships? But then you say, well, the ships are here because I'm here. Then it becomes a self-licking lollipop. You know, why are you there? So I think the decision was the right one, but it's taken me a good 10 years to be able to say that. And that's not a maturity thing. It's just having seen that we got away with it. We might not have got away with it if something had happened in the world that needed us. And of course, straight after we got rid of the Harrier, Libya kicked off. And so it would have been a lot easier to have done that with Harriers and Sea Harriers, of course. I've got Dan the Americans did a bomb whoopsie and blew out nearly every window on the whole island of Sardinia. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that probably happened. Whoopsies happened all the time, and you know, that's when you've got humans flying aeroplanes. humans make mistakes, and that sort of thing happens, I'm afraid. Big stories, keep them shorter, I think somebody said here, something like that. Long but great, that's from Alexander Vatter. Low level in the Buccaneer. Have you got any stories about that? That's from MKMD. He's getting a lot of action. Really, yes. I fouled up really badly once. My boss said, go to Linton and do a graduation fly past. And I said, all right, okay, what do you want me to do? He said, oh, go as low as fast as you can. And how do you think you do a beat up? I thought, okay. So I did, and I did a very low flight down the runway, very, very fast, broke around the back, and then came between two hangars. This is all getting very tawdry. Came between two hangars on one wingtip, right in front of the guests, then went downwind and put the gear down and the hook and opened the bomb door and all of that stuff, and then flew down the line of jet provosts. And thought that was great, cleaned up, climbed away, and then went back to Lossiemouth. The boss met me at the aeroplane and said, how fast did you go? I said, oh, fantastically, nearly 600 knots. He says, what's the limit on the pave spike pod? Oh, 555. Right, let's go and have a look. So he walked me almost by my ear to the aircraft, and there were some crinkles in the skin underneath where the pave spike pod had been, well, was. And he said, that's going to take weeks to solve. Oh, God. Okay, I'm sorry. And then he said that I wasn't authorised to do that sort of fly past. And, a fly past is to just fly through and then depart, not to do almost an impromptu display, having not been a display pilot. So he shouted at me for a long, long time. But then it got even worse when a photo came out, and it looked like I was flying along with of course, the aeroplane's very nose high and the tail sits really low then when you're flying along like that. And so with the hook down as well, the hook apparently only just missed this entire line of jet provost. So I learned a lot about that. But the story is that the aeroplane handled beautifully, and I was able to fly it that low and able to fly it that fast because it was a Buccaneer, and that's what people wanted to see. So although I got shouted at, I also got a few winks as well. So it was an interesting day out. I didn't know quite what to make of it at the time because I was very young, very early 20s, so still a puppy. You talk about, this is from Dylan Milne, you talk about the Harrier flipping over while in VTOL. Do you know anybody who flew inverted whilst in VTOL, and what was it like? Well, no, because she would die very quickly. The aircraft, because of there's all sorts of, it would take the rest of tonight to describe the phenomenon that is brought about by a start of intake momentum drag and forces in front of the centre of pressure and centre of gravity in this instance, and advancing wing and then flipping upside down with anhedral. There's all sorts of things that much more knowledgeable pilots can talk to you about that. But all I did was keep the ball in the middle and keep the vane in the middle, and then I was all right. So that's how I flew the Harrier. I didn't do any of the funky stuff because my role really, as I saw it, was to kill folks and to go off and protect Britain's interest and your interests. It wasn't to mess about in an area of flight and the regime of flight that I wasn't necessarily going to have to be comfortable in. But when it came to air combat, of course, then I wrung its neck. That's how that went. Ray Lauderback, how long were the legs of the FA2 and how long and far were the cap missions from the ship? Do you know what? I can't remember much, but I think, well, one of the things that's certainly true is because we didn't have afterburners, we were on station for a lot longer. So those aircraft that had to fight with the burners in were off after 10 minutes, and we could often put up a pair of aircraft or a single aircraft and have multiple DACT engagements with different aircraft. It would all run out of fuel. So you might end up with 3 aircraft coming up to meet you and then go home and do the spaghetti, which is the writing of what happened in the air combat arena and we would tend to write that because we were the air defenders and could construct and reconstruct the fight from memory and from notes. Here's a question from Mike. Did you ever do a fly past in the Tornado in 63 and 67 wing in full reheat? Yes, but the identity is removed to protect the guilty. Which squadron were flying Buccaneers with 15? That's from Bill. That was before my time. When I went to the Buccaneer, only 237 OCU, 208 Squadron and 12 Squadron flew Buccaneers. 15 and 16, I think, in Larbruck were the Buccaneer squadrons in Germany. Do you ever miss all that speed, and how do you get that same thrill if you do? Yeah, I do, but I'm getting on for 58 now. I have got a nice car that I go fast in. I wring its neck. No, I get more of a sense of pride now in getting things right. You know, I'm no spring chicken anymore, and it's much better to pass on a set of professional standards to new pilots than it is to pass on some 80s idea of what Top Gun should be like. So things have changed for me because I'm an airline pilot and a trainer. So really it's setting an example, and all these stories, of course, make it sound like that's how I am now. I probably still am. I probably still am a schoolboy. But of course, it's an act, isn't it? The three most important things about being a pilot are image, image, and image. And so you have to, you know, keep the front going, really. That's true, you know, and people who don't say that, well, a bit odd, really. Dave Smith, were the Buck, Tornado, and SHAR hard to refuel at anything beyond 10 to 15,000 feet, given their engines being tuned to lower altitudes? Well, no, the Buck could, because it was more of a turbojet than a fan, had really good response on the throttles, so you could tank a Buck high. Tornado, not so much. You would have to put one into minimum afterburner, and so that's sort of defeating the whole point of taking fuel. So being on the tanker took longer, so you'd want the tanker lower, so you didn't have to do that. And it was even better if the tanker was going somewhere, so you didn't have to turn, because if you turn, you need more power. You'd then have to modulate one into min burner and then modulate the other in military power. And so you've only got one engine doing the forward and back thing. And so that, you know, again, you've got all this stuff going on. So the Tornado wasn't as easy to tank. And the bow wave from the Tornado created a movement of the basket, and the arm for the basket was out of your peripheral vision. So it was really interesting tanking in the Tornado. Not impossible, because we did it, but it was. I found that quite a challenge, to be honest. Sea Harrier, I don't know how we did that, because it was so far behind you and up out of your normal vision. If you're looking through the hood, you couldn't see the probe at all. So my technique for that was to get as close as I could and sort of kiss the basket and get it in the middle, and then put on some power and sort of shoulder myself into the basket. And I was lucky, I never spoked, and they often say there are those who have spoked and those who are going to, and I was convinced I was going to, but never did, so I was very lucky. The Action Atco. Hi John, Russ Eatwell taught me through a 4-ship sort once, 4x4 AMRAAM. How good was the Blue Vixen's Twiz during ACM? In not alerting the enemy to your engaging intentions. Okay, track while scan is a very low power mode in the radar, where the radar will look through various rasters. So it will look in different modes in track while scan or Twiz, and it will be a very low power output, and it won't dwell very long. So the amount of energy that an opposing fighter can receive is very light, but we had a very sensitive radar, so the reflected energy, which would be a 16th of the power of the transmitted wave to that aircraft, could be detected, and so we could see things in Twiz, and other pilots in our opponents wouldn't know that they'd been detected. Quite often you would have to mash down in other aeroplanes to go single target track and stare the radar like a fire hose at the target and continue that fire hose all the way through missile flight. In our aeroplane, we just had to get a track while scan, hit 3 or 4 of those, it would build a track. We'd mark the track, mash down on the track, accept it. I can't remember what the word is now. There's a word. And it would then go into the readout line. It would do its working, and it would prioritize in the right order. And I can't tell you how it did that, but it was very clever. And then you just press the button, and the first one would go, then the second, then the third, then the fourth. And they would go to 4 separate targets or 2 targets, whatever you programmed it to do. And it would then fly to a certain distance, and then the radar in the missile would take over, and we can then go home. So that was the plan. Not quite go home, of course. We'd support the missile in case it didn't work, and then come in. So Stanley Morgan, I missed a few, I'm so sorry, but Stanley Morgan, did you suffer from hawk neck? Yeah, I did. I got hawk rash more than hawk neck. The backs of my thighs would quite often be black, but the QIs did a lot of high G stuff, and the bottom of my arms, I'd have a burst blood vessels in my arms, and on a couple of occasions I got red eye where I'd pushed a little bit too much negative G and popped a few blood vessels in my eyes, so I looked like the devil, which as a QI is probably the normal state of affairs, so nobody was too surprised. Yeah, the Hawk was an amazing aeroplane, and yeah, Hawk neck would quite often, the students got it a lot because, can you see him, Blogs? I'm going to pitch back now. You know, that gap between the pull and the now, too much, and they'd spring their necks. So quite often we'd have lads walking and girls walking around, you know, all a bit stiff. But they wouldn't tell anybody, they'd just get on with it. Oh, here's Mike, he's going to tell me off.
No, I'm not telling you off. John, can we maybe have you till half 8?
Yeah, I've got nothing but sweets and comics to get through, so yeah.
Great, brilliant.
Yeah. What was your RAF call sign? Oh, mine was amazing. JP. Yeah, dead hard. And that didn't change. I was so lucky. There were guys that had names that were so embarrassing that you couldn't tell your dad, let alone your mum. And so I got away with it. I was JP all the way through my career. So I'm sure I was called other things behind my back, but to my face it was JP, so I got away with it, I think. Any fights with F4s? Yeah, a little bit with F4s, but usually with them protecting the ships on the Buccaneer. They'd gone by the time I got to the Tornado, or rather were going. But the thing about the F4 that I loved was in bad weather, we'd be off doing a course up in the North Sea against, I say we're on a course, we're supporting a course. I can't remember what they used to call it now. We used to have it every JMC, that's it, Joint Maritime Course. And the commanders of the Navy, NATO navies, would go on this course and they would run a day of a task group as the task group commander, and we would attack them. Where was I going with this one? Air Force. And in really bad weather, our navigators would still be able to find the ships with one sweep of a radar. It was amazing, and we'd use some tactical direction from Nimrods as well, of course. But finding the fighters in bad weather was always pretty hit and miss. So we'd tend to put the fighters ahead and not have any embedded escort. So we wouldn't have the fighters in with us. We'd have them ahead, pushing all of the other fighters, opposing fighters, out of the way. But when it was the Phantom, and the Phantom's radar wasn't particularly modern at that time, we thought we would sooner have them in with us than ahead pushing. So we split it a bit, and we asked 56 Squadron to look after us as we attacked on a JMC. And I remember coming around the top of the Shetland Islands, and the weather was probably about 1 kilometres vis, and we were down at about 100 feet, and the visibility was impossible. And we were all close into each other, you know, in what we call fighting wing, just a couple hundred feet apart, all four of us. And then out of the gloom came these phantoms and just sat either side of us. And we thought, how did you do that? That was some of the best airmanship and fighter flying I think I'd ever seen at that point. And when you look over your shoulder and see a phantom, you're really quite frightened. And they were on our side. So, yeah, the Phantom, I really liked it. Obviously, not particularly effective at that time, but in its day, an amazing aeroplane. Did you come across any strange traditions as you were posted to various units in the RAF as well as the Navy? Well, every squadron has its own theme and its own feel, and that never seems to change. And you all have your own songs and music to play at dinners and that sort of stuff. But the big change for me was moving from the RAF to the Navy, where in the Air Force you stand up to toast the Queen at dinners, and in the Navy you don't, because you might bang your head on the deckhead. So there you go, Jack speak, deckhead, not ceiling. You never get rid of it. Things like how you pour port. You know, in the Air Force, you never let it touch the table, and in the Navy, you never let it leave the table because you might spill some in the ship roll. So a lot of the traditions were, well, there were bad habits in the Air Force and traditions in the Navy, I was often told. But the differences between the two were just to cause the other a bit of upset, really. So, yeah, and I had to walk that tightrope all the time, or not. And often ignored both. That's not because I was anything different, but I couldn't remember half of them. Let's have a look. Was the FA2 a good gun platform? Were AMRAAMs normally carried in place of the gun pods? Yes, if you carried, well, you would always, to be honest, you wouldn't take a knife to a gunfight. So you wouldn't take guns to a missile fight, in my book. So the guns were often an aside, a useful distraction. There was a time when we thought we'd use them for steep strafe in Sierra Leone and places like that. So it would be a good low yield weapon without much collateral damage. So it had a place in the air to ground arena on the FA2. Air to air, I'm not so sure we'd have ever fitted them, to be honest. We'd have always gone for by AIM 120s. So we'd have gone 4 AMRAAMs. We did have the 9 mic for the visual fight, but really, I think we'd have always gone 4. It was certainly my plan on 800 Squadron was to Naval Air Squadron was to go 4 out. Are aircraft specs on Wikipedia reliable? I don't know. I never look at that stuff. I'm really I don't like numbers much. I can never remember them for a start, so I don't learn them. If I can't remember them, why learn them? So I tend to get away with it by knowing the tactics stuff, and so I don't look at Wikipedia for the numbers. So in terms of gun platform, though, let's get back to that question, and that was from Ray Lauderback again. The aircraft had some good snapshot facilities in the HOTAS, so yeah, it was all right. And remember, you only have to get a couple of rounds on them, and you let the airflow do the rest. It's not like you see in games like Battlefield 5, where you can be there for about an hour trying to shoot down something with a machine gun, and you know, you see bits flying off. If you see something fly off, it's going in the water, generally speaking. So aeroplanes don't tend to fly around with big holes in them much. Oh yeah, I know of one that landed on a merchant vessel. Well, we're all mates with the guy, so you know, what we can say is that none of that was his fault. If an aircraft has had a problem with its navigation system and then it aligns in a funny way, and you're still made to go flying, then really, I think the Navy got what it asked for on that occasion. Right, let's go back a few, see if I've missed any here. What's the normal strategy for performing CAS missions in an area with hostile surface to air? I don't know the acronym, SPAAs. I think I think you're talking about portable air defence systems, manned portable air defence systems. You have to do what you have to do, I guess. It depends what stage of a war you're at, how vital it is for that operation or that mission on the ground to be happening. I didn't do an awful lot of CAS. There were better platforms for CAS. And I do know, though, that CAS is an emotive mission. You do get very attached to people that you're talking to, and you've probably been speaking to them, for an hour a day for the last 3 weeks. And so you're getting a bit of a bond, and you probably met up with them before all this started as well. So you are emotionally vested in looking after your own troops. That's why you're there. And so your level of appetite for risk is an individual thing. And people say, oh, you shouldn't do re-attacks. Well, really? You do what you've got to do. If you've got troops in contact and they're screaming on a radio, you do what you've got to do. If, however, you're in a task force and your aircraft are the difference between the aircraft, the war being won or not, and you're preserving those aircraft for other missions, sure, that's just tough. Those guys are on their own in that instance. And so that's sort of a Falklands mentality, but you could understand it. So it's all a balance, and it's all an appetite for risk, and nobody's going to be too upset with you if you get that particularly wrong or overly right. It's a balance. It's the person on the day, how they see it going. So that's how I viewed it. Let's have a look here. Favorite World War II fighter? I'd say the Hurricane. I mean, great gun platform, bit of a nightmare to fly. Well, I've done that, so I can appreciate that. Yeah, I think the Hurricane would have been more me than a Spitfire, but I still want to fly a Spitfire. What's fast after doing bullet speed at 20 feet? Yeah, it does take a bit of readjusting to normal flying, but there are different challenges. Yeah, it's really good fun, and it's a real art form to fly uber low and uber fast, but it's also an art form to fly professionally and to get people from A to B, and the aircraft's got the same number of dents in it as when you wrote your name in the tech log, and to do that to the best of your professional ability and to get it right and to demonstrate those professional standards to a peer is incredibly rewarding. So where people say, oh, we fly airliners and it's boring, it is not boring. It's a challenge, just like any other flying. It's just a different kind of challenge. And I find flying an airliner just as hard as flying any other aeroplane, because you set standards that you hope to achieve, and we never quite get there. So you should always set a standard that's just a little bit out of reach, otherwise you'll get stale and you'll be rubbish. Let's have a look how we're getting on. Reflecting on your time spent with the RN, do you think the SHAR Invincible platform was better for its time in history than an Art Royal F4 Buck platform running into the 90s as a projection of force? I would say, in terms of projection of force, the bigger the carrier with the highest sortie generation rate is the biggest stick to beat an enemy with hard power. And so I would say that the old Art Royal with Phantoms and Bucks was more of a political deterrent to others to stop messing us about. There's no coincidence, I don't think, that once Art Royal had gone, the Falklands were placed in political jeopardy by that decision. So they still invaded with the SHAR Invincible combo, but they didn't when Art Royal and Buccaneers and Phantoms were around. So I would say it's about strike power from sea to shore. Remember, most of the world's population lives within 250 miles of the coast, and that's the combat radius of most fighters. So we can reach out and influence political decisions if we've got that ability. And if all we're doing is protecting our own fleet, and the fleet is there to put 8 Sea Harriers in place, then again, that's that self-licking lollipop thing going on, and that doesn't serve an awful lot. But there are occasions when the strike power from Invincible or Ark Royal were amazing, like in the Falklands. But it is a balance of using air power and sea power at the right time, in the right way, at the right place, at a time of your choosing, having maintained an aim. And that requires some of the best tactical commanders and strategic commanders to be able to balance all of those different sensitivities all happening at the same time. And no sooner have you gone into a room to start planning something that the whole thing changes. And that's the Navy working in that chaotic way. Because it's so chaotic, why work any other way? War is chaotic, and for that reason, because while you're planning one thing, something else is changing why you're planning in the first place. So it's an interesting conundrum. Any problems with Navy Tomcats? I don't think I went up against Tomcats apart from that mission that I described off Benghazi. But I didn't see any of them. I saw a few F-18s while we were in the overhead watching them go past. They'd already been shot, of course, but they were going past the ship. But I saw the F-18s, but I understand that somebody got some detections on a Tomcat that day, but I can't be sure. So I never got in amongst a Tomcat. Stephen D. Boyd here. I'm heading into the Royal Navy as a pilot. Failed my aptitude test by 1 mark. Any advice? Yeah, never take no for an answer. I was lucky enough to meet Douglas Bader, and my dad had a dog at the time called Radar, and I was holding the dog. My dad was standing next to me, and Douglas Bader comes down some stairs at an air show. And my dad says, "This is my son, he wants to be a pilot." And he said, "Well, why isn't he talking to me? Why are you talking to me?" He was ever so brusque. And so I then started talking, and I said, "Right, can you give me some advice?" And this is the same advice I'm going to give you, Stephen. Never take no for an answer. Sometimes the Navy or the Air Force doesn't know what's good for them, and it's your job to tell them. And that's the same once you get in. So never take no for an answer. Keep bashing on, keep improving, because being a pilot is a continuous improvement. You've got to be better tomorrow than you were today. All you've proved is there's an opportunity for you to be better tomorrow. So don't get disheartened by it. Take it as a way of motivating yourself. Right, I'm going to pick myself up and I'm going to get that sorted. I'm going to practice that until I can do this beautifully. And then I'm going to practice something else. And then they're going to turn me down for something else. And so what? I'll get better at that. And before they know it, they'll want me. And that's the way to look at it. Never let anybody beat you. That's my kids hate me for every time I suggest we have a game of something, they go, "No, Dad, no." Because they've never been allowed to win anything. It sends totally the wrong message. Here we go. Action Atco. Once again, thanks for the detailed reply from one Nuneaton lad to another. I was born in the George Eliot Hospital, dragged up in Atherstone. What is the best piece of advice you could give a 17-year-old who's going to apply to the Navy with hopes of getting to fast jets or helicopters? Same advice. Never, ever, ever, ever take no for an answer. You just keep bashing on. People will get bored of the same answer, and in the end they'll let you in or they'll give in. Just be resilient and don't take any of this nonsense. Just if you know that you're good enough, just keep applying, just keep bashing in and improving. Though don't do it. Don't keep applying and don't do the improving bit in the middle. That's that Einstein thing. You know, a dumb person repeats their actions exactly the same way, expecting a different outcome. That, you know, improve in the middle, do whatever it takes, but just keep going back, and they'll like it. They do like it. I went four times before I got in, and I followed Douglas Bader's advice, and it worked for me. So, what story do you most like telling? Oh, I couldn't tell you guys. That's for whispering to people. What story do you most like telling? It's a story of when I got arrested. Nothing to do with the Air Force. It's to do with an old mate who's my best mate in the Air Force. Got me arrested in Germany during the World Cup in 2006 for football hooliganism while I was on my command course. There you go. I like telling that story, but I can't tell it to you. Scholarships through the Air Cadets. There's also the Air League bursaries, and Honourable Company of Air Pilots. I think they've got some flying awards that they give out as well. Let's have a look here. How did you get on with and without extra crew on board when flying solo or two aircrew? I found it hard flying with two. I found it hard flying on my own. Did I find one harder than the other? No, because you fill up the available time. A minute's still a minute, and in a tornado, a minute is filled by two people working and talking. In a Sea Harrier, it's filled by one man needing four arms, only got two and can only get that far out with both of them. But a minute is still a minute, so you can fit into a minute a heck of a lot. So if you start to lose capacity and things start to get a bit fuzzy and tumbleweedy, as we'd say, what am I going to do in a minute's time? What do I need to have done before I get there? Now, where will I be? And who do I need to talk to now? So aviate, navigate, communicate. And that gets you out of any hole that you can find yourself in. So single seat ops is very, very challenging. I found it really hard. I found two seat ops really hard for completely different reasons. Coming up to the standard expected from the other guy in the same aeroplane is a challenge. You haven't got that on your own. And here's an example. I went up to Nick Richardson one day and said to him, I can't see a set of downwind checks in these flight reference cards. And he folded his arms and he said, well, what do you think you need to do downwind then, JP? And I said, well, we'd have to, I guess, put the wheels down or keep the wheels down, check the water switch is on if I'm going to use water, that the nose wheel steering switch is either in one position or the other, depending if I'm on the carrier or not, and if the brakes work. He says, well, there you go. There's your downwind checks. Enjoy. And you know, if you're in a single seat aeroplane, who cares? You're on your own, and so nobody's going to be looking. So you really are using the aeroplane as a tool, as an instrument of war, rather than flying an aeroplane. You are the weapon. The aircraft and what it's got hanging off it are just tools that you're using, and that's the way they seem to view it, and it works. What was the coziest cockpit? Well, cozy was the Sea Harrier in terms of tight, and this is from the Freckle Puny again. The most comfortable cockpit was the Tornado. You sat in like a bath chair. It was fantastic. You had so much room in the Tornado, and you could drop your mask and still talk in a normal voice to the guy in the back, and he could shout at you and you'd hear him. You try that in a Buccaneer, no way. Buccaneer was really noisy, but the Harrier in the hover was incredibly noisy. Let's have a look. How do I pass time on long haul flights as well as being observant? Do you have any strategies to pass the time? Believe it or not, you can go from one side of the Atlantic to the other and not have a pause for breath. there are days where you are working incredibly hard, keeping a mental air picture and keeping those professional standards going and gathering a situational awareness, especially if there's bad weather around at various places on the route. And you've got to always be thinking of contingencies and keeping your picture the same as the person sitting next to you, because if something goes wrong and you're in different places in your mind, then the aircraft will go to a different place to the one that you're expecting. And so keeping that model and sharing it with others and keeping their awareness as high as yours, or using their awareness to bring yours up, and managing the obvious, which is fatigue, and especially flying through the night. So, managing yourself, being fit. And I don't mean running fit, I mean mentally fit, keeping a life that's not too complex. Now, everybody who knows me will be laughing now because my life is so complex. But I'm used to managing it like that. Those who find themselves in a complex life and they're not used to it, they then have all these life stress points. So flying across the Atlantic in an airliner is a challenge. Some days, other days, it's quite nice, and you can have a more relaxed opportunity to find out more about the person you're flying with and their background, and that builds a picture of what you can expect and how you can expect them to react when different stresses happen. So flying airliners is no less difficult, I find, than flying other aeroplanes. The skills are different, but the professional standards are exactly the same. Right, got 10 minutes left, so I can take a few. If I can just go back and see if there's anybody that I've missed out. I'm sure I have. I can only go at certain speed though. There's a good one here from Stanley Morgan. The Buccaneer was only given a retractable undercarriage so it could get down to its operating altitude when you brought it up. I don't know if the captain of the ship collected salvage on it. I don't know if that was the case. I think it did, actually. I think there was a salvage payment to get the aircraft back. No, I didn't fly. This is for Philip Blair. I didn't ever work, I don't think, with Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich. The Buccaneer cockpit was very old. The instrumentation looked old. It was the Lightning instruments. Yeah, it really did look old, but it worked. And, if it isn't broken, why fix it? Did I ever get trips in other aircraft? And if so, which one would you have liked to fly? I flew in an F-16, F-18. I flew with the Red Arrows loads of times on full displays, practices in Cyprus and that. Really enjoyed that. Flew in an F-5 with the Norwegian Air Force. That was really cool. Surprisingly, the wings bounce up and down. It looked like they were going to flap. So that was a bit disconcerting. Nearly got a flight in a Starfighter from the guys at Grosseto. Which type of airliner do I fly? Now it's the Boeing 787. Before that, the 737. Before that, the 76 and 75. I think we're sort of getting to the end of the questions there. I can't see any more coming down the tracks. Did you ever fancy going for the Reds? Yeah, I applied a couple of times. I wasn't good enough. What was the most fun you've ever had in the air? I think I told a story about flying the Hawk. My best ever flight in any aircraft was the Battle of Umbungo Gorge on the QY course, where we had 30 odd aircraft in one valley with a low cloud base, and everybody was in the bottom all turning, and aircraft absolutely everywhere, and we knew what was going on and we absolutely cleaned up. That was fantastic. If I was 20 again, would you go for the RAF or the Navy? If I was 20 again now, do you know, it doesn't really matter. They're both amazing organisations. Both fight in a different way. Very different feel to both forces, but they're both excellent to be a part of and to be near, even, as is the British Army. You know, you find some amazing people in all three services, and the Royal Marines, of course. I mean, best commandos in the world. So we are blessed in our country with the people that choose to go into those lines of work, and we're blessed with the forces that they join. Did the Buccaneer make you feel safe during all the Cold War paranoia? Well, you know, when you go out and accept a nuclear weapon, that doesn't feel too safe, does it, really? But the reason you were doing it so that everybody was safe. So you have this paradox always that, you know, we were the ones that weren't safe so that everybody else could be. But that really then follows through all of your military service for every serviceman. Favourite ever moment whilst flying was the Battle of Umbungo Gorge. I just cannot tell anybody how joyful that flight was. And we had other guys on the course landing with no fuel whatsoever at West Frew. And one aircraft landed in a hut with the rat out, which meant that the engine had stopped at some point. That's how little fuel he had. But it was an amazing flight. He was a French exchange officer. Was there ever a time that you were worried about getting back on the flight deck due to weather? Not really. I think, remember, the ship would always find weather and it would go and sit under it so it could protect itself on radar and disappear. And then it would pop out to the edge for us to come and land. But it was wind and stuff like that, and difficult conditions over the deck through odd winds were often a problem. I never had a feeling that I wasn't going to get back aboard. Perhaps I should have, and perhaps I was a bit too stupid to know. But it seemed to me that I was always going to be coming aboard. What qualifications did you have when you went in? I had 9 O-levels. I failed my O-levels spectacularly. Maths, etc. I had to retake them while I was doing A-levels. I did maths A-level, having failed O-level maths because I thought it would be good. Failed my A-levels, had to redo my A-levels. Then I applied for a university cadetship with the RAF and applied to the Hawker Siddeley course at Kingston Polytechnic. And the RAF said that we don't give university cadetships to people at polytechnics, which was a bit of a blow, having just applied. And the Polytechnic said I didn't have the right A-levels to go, didn't meet the offer. So I said, well, you know, I'm joining the RAF. And they took that as I was accepted. I just said I was joining the RAF, and they allowed me on the course. And once I was on the course, I had the credibility. And I was very lucky that Martin Baker, the ejection seat company, then did my industrial placement. And that's when everything changed for me. Martin Baker not only builds the best ejection seats, but Martin Baker is one of the finest companies to work for in Britain. And they looked after me like gold, and they set my professional standards. I changed in that time, not through bullying and hectoring and a difficult place. I changed because everybody was kind to me, and everybody cut me some slack and helped me improve. And I learnt so much from that, and I've hopefully people think I've done that for them ever since.
Right, so John, if you can maybe pick two more questions to wrap up this Q&A, that would be great.
Okay. Let's have a look. If you could go back in time and tell your younger self just one story, what would it be? I would say don't drink I would tell a story about me running through a burning piano with no clothes on, drinking Jack Daniels and Coke to a degree that was almost bedwettingly drunk in front of the wives of the Air Force Board at the end of the Buccaneer party. I would tell that story to myself to prevent me the embarrassment of a nylon sock shrinking injury. And that's probably not what you wanted, Mike, but you did ask the question. All right. In your opinion, what is the finest looking aircraft you've seen in person? The finest looking. This might be weird. Obviously the Spitfire, because of that beautiful wing. Obviously the Lightning, because of that beautiful swept cutout Delta mainform wing. But I quite like the Boeing 757.
Oh, yeah, likewise, yeah, I like that one.
I didn't like flying it particularly. I thought the 76 was a nicer aeroplane to fly. But when you look at a 757, there's just something dolphin about it. And it always made me double take. Whenever I was walking out to one, I would go, "Ooh, oh, that looks good." So I think the 757, to be honest, which is a bit of a weird answer.
I thought you were going to say the Tornado F3, but yeah, like for our F3 fans in here. But yeah, I mean, what a brilliant Q&A. So, John, thank you very much for coming on. It's been absolutely amazing. And yeah, thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. And hopefully, John answered your questions. But yeah, John, thank you very much.
That was a quick fire. I'm going to need to drink for about an hour now, I think.
I know, yeah. Fed and watered, so like hopefully soon. But yeah, thank you very much, John. I really appreciate it, and thank you very much for joining us in the comments there. So thank you very much.
And thank you for the opportunity to talk on your channel, and also from the pilot community. It's very much appreciated what you're doing, Mike, because these are being captured for the children of the future, because these stories are not being told today. These are stories of the 80s and the 90s, and that was a period where things were very relaxed, but at the same time very frightening. And so I thank you for capturing this moment in history for lots of other people.
Oh, well, that's very much appreciated, John. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll get you back on the channel, later down the line. So thank you very much.
Always.
Cheers, John.
Bye.